Welcome to Sacred Realms. It's a great day in Hyrule, y'all. Welcome to Sacred Realms, a Zelda Retrospective Podcast. For the second to last time in the front half of Season 6 of this show, I am your host, Lyndon Willoughby, and this is typically the part where I would say that I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, Matt Willoughby. Unfortunately, Matt has had some life circumstances arise. He's fine, don't worry about him too much. He'll be back next week. Unfortunately, he cannot join us for this episode. So, what was I to do? Well, I think the only logical course of action would be to bring on not only one extra guest, but two extra guests, and thus the balance is maintained. Ladies and gentlemen, I am pleased to welcome back onto the podcast returning favorites, the brothers Ben and Pat over at Hyrule Podcasters, and this is where I let you guys do your whole thing.
Oh, we got a whole thing.
Oh, we got a whole thing. You got a whole
Definitely.
thing. Well, we got it. I should have teed it up better. So this is, of course, Ben and Pat, the brothers that you know and love over at
Hyrule
Podcasters. What's going on? What's going on?
What up? What up? By the way, I thought you did a fine tee, but I did like the mulligan. I'm about the mulligan. Why not?
No, that's cool. That's cool. We're about grace and forgiveness on this show, so it's cool.
Excellent. Yeah.
And I think, in fairness, I think that started a little squirrely, and then towards the end, we really got it synchronized.
Definitely.
Yeah, good stuff. Sometimes you just look. We've been recording for 25, 45 seconds here. So I mean, we're jumping in cold, but we got there in the end. We're warmed up. We're ready to record a show. How are y'all doing? It's been a minute.
Ben, you want to start?
Yeah, so we're doing well. I mean, we're still on a break after our last season playing Ocarina of Time, getting ready to start on the Game Boy Color edition of Link's Awakening DX.
Link's Awakening DX, here we come. We've been taking a hiatus. We've been doing a lot of podcast past stuff in the meantime. Been being proper nerds, doing some Sandman, the comic stuff, but I just cannot wait to get back and play Link's Awakening DX.
It's so funny because we were recording our episode last week with Josh from Zelda Universe, and so we got him on the horn, and we're just catching up a little bit, and I was like, oh yeah, it's fun, we're going to be with Ben and Pat from Hyrule Podcasters next week, and Josh is like, no way, I just recorded an episode with them.
He's been making the rounds. It was fun. We haven't put out our episode yet, but I think by the time this airs, it will be out.
I think that's right.
It's good meeting him.
Care if I ask what the topic was?
Oh, Ben, actually, we can't reveal because we just chatted about this and that, but Ben came up with this really cool game that he played with Joshua, and I think it's better left as a surprise. Am I right, Ben?
Yeah, I think so. So essentially, I had listened to Joshua on a bunch of other of our, friends' podcasts. He's been, making the rounds ever since he announced that he was pretty much up for interviews on anyone's podcast. I think everybody pretty much hit him up in the Zelda universe trademark. And what I figured, but kind of everybody asked him the same questions. And so I decided to deliberately not ask him any questions about favorite Zelda, first Zelda, give me your rankings. And instead I devised this game that took up the first 20 minutes of the interview. And I had fun. Patrick had fun. I'm pretty sure Joshua had fun too. So,
yep. If he didn't have fun, he was kind enough to pretend like he was having fun.
That is true. He was a very, because we definitely dropped it on I'm going to make up a game that you're going to play. And he's like, all right, I'm down.
I didn't even know going in.
Yeah. So
I mean, he told me that he had fun. So unless we were all separately being lied to,
yeah, amazing.
That's great.
How have you been?
I love that. Oh, I mean, I'm good. I was just gonna say, there's no better way to take up, a few minutes a pod than just like coming up with a game on the spot,
absolutely,
and just rolling. I mean, we got our excellent collaborative episode where we did our Zelda draft picks in much the same way. And
yeah,
that was a huge success.
I'm
absolutely.
learning that, and this is something that Ben's kind of realized later in life, that you don't have to be able to like draw really well or play an instrument to be creative. There's so many ways to be creative in the business world or the sports world, or like every field has games to play, and within games, there's always room for creativity.
Yeah.
Yep. I think that's very true. As a creative professional, I would definitely echo the sentiment that creativity is never to be pigeonholed. It is fluid and it exists in many forms. So.
And then obviously our biggest thing is that we launched a podcasting network, Odd Conduit Media. We launched the second show on that network, The Sandman Unlocked, which covers the Sandman comic book and television series, and are getting ready later this fall to come out with our third podcast, which is a podcast that'll focus on food insecurity in northeastern rural Ohio. So we're just trying to really dive into all this podcasting stuff because it's a lot of fun.
And I have to say,
that sounds highly specific. Just want to say,
well, so the idea is that we're trying to work with nonprofits to help them tell a story, right? And so this specific first season of this larger project is focused in the place that we grew up, because we have access to people to talk to about stuff like that.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
And I don't want to undersell the Sandman podcast, because I'm just reading the comics for the first time, and we have a theologian, and what does Sean have, a doctorate in comic books, at least a master's or two.
Yeah.
They're smart cats. It's been really cool having them like along with me for my first read.
Yeah, it's been really fun.
I can confess that my only exposure to Neil Gaiman is through American Gods, the novel, which I have read, and I guess I watched the first season of the show when Brian Fuller was still the one running it, and then kind of fell off. But I have never read Sandman, and thus like the show has also kind of been off my radar, especially because there's just between like House of the Dragon and Rings of Power, I'm like booked up right now.
Gluttony of content right now.
So
for sure.
much content.
Yeah. No doubt. But that's cool. I'm really glad to hear that you guys are keeping busy and like expanding your whole thing that you do. I mean, like Lord knows that talking about the same thing, forever, especially if this is something you want to do more as like a, less of a hobby, more of a career, just finding things that you can stay interested talking about on a microphone for hours a week. Well, there you go. That's pure gold.
Sure. Certainly. And to give other people stuff to listen to as well, Our podcast is an audio only let's play of a video game. It's people are like, wait, what? Is it on Twitch? We're like, nope, it works. Just listen to it. You can jog down the block, listening to us play a video game, and almost imagine you're playing it. But it's still specific, and to be able to bring other ideas into a podcast realm for our listeners, our potential listeners, is a lot of fun.
Sure. So I want to bring it back around to Hyrule Podcasters for a minute. The thing that kind of kickstarted at least like our whole friendship, and the reason that we have, occasion to like talk about Zelda every now and again. So you said you're moving on to Link's Awakening DX, and your last game was what again?
Ocarina of Time.
Okay, cool. So I guess my question is, what brought you guys to choosing the DX version of Link's Awakening instead of either the original Game Boy release or the Switch remaster? I will remind everybody, this group unanimously voted as being the best first Zelda for a Switch owner. It was the Link's Awakening Switch remake.
Yeah, definitely. And I stand by that. I think that the remake is just fantastic, and I would suggest that most modern gamers go straight to that and skip the DX version. But if you're into retro gaming and if you have access to the DX version and you want to do it, I say go for it. The reason we're doing it this way is because we're trying to go through the games in release date order. Now we flip-flopped with this and Ocarina because we wanted to play Ocarina with the rest of the world when it came to Switch, which was a lot of fun to do. But we're going back to Link's Awakening right now. And I just feel like it would be doing things out of order, right? To go to a game on the Switch that was designed in 2020 or whatever, as opposed to sticking to the classic version of the game. And then, the argument is like, well, then why don't you do the one for Game Boy instead of Game Boy Color? And that's because it's the same game with an extra dungeon and a lot more color.
Yeah, we weren't going to do both versions.
Right.
And since
both as in both Game Boy versions.
Correct. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's very fair. And obviously, like, I've played all three versions of Link's Awakening several times each. So I think you're obviously definitely right. The DX version is, for all intents and purposes, the same experience as the Game Boy version. I will say that what I think is interesting is that it is so much more akin, like, especially in terms of like its color palette and the way that the game feels when you're playing it. It's so much. It's so similar to the Oracle games.
Definitely.
I've never played those, so that'll be very exciting for me.
The Oracle games are on the same. I don't know if Game Boy games had an engine per se, but it's on the same. It's on the same code base as Link's Awakening. Same sprites, same items, system, same.
Didn't
everything.
They basically just like give all of that coding to Capcom? Like, hey, you have like a year to make 2 Zelda games, go. And so they were like, why not? We're not going to mess with something that works just fine. We're going to leave it. They're beautiful games. I've only dabbled in them. I haven't beaten either of them, but I have them both on my 3DS, and I open them sometimes and wander around not knowing where to go. I should probably just start them over. Well, we'll get to those. And part of the experience of the podcast is we have listeners who play along each game with us each season, and to work your way through the technology is part of the podcast. That's another reason that we're sticking to the release date order as opposed to jumping ahead and playing the Switch version. But we will be talking a lot about the differences. And if, to the listeners out there, you've played the Switch version and haven't played the Game Boy version, you're still going to be able to follow along the season. It's the same story, the same scenes.
Certainly.
You'll enjoy listening to the retro music that they simply just kind of re-recorded. And it's going to hit the same notes, literally and figuratively, as the game that you've played and already undoubtedly love on the Switch.
So getting ready to play this game, how does it feel living in a world where Nintendo could basically drop their Game Boy service on the Switch at any moment?
Oh my God.
Like,
if only we could be that lucky.
Only we could be that lucky. I'm just so excited for the Game Boy service to show up that I didn't even consider how it connects back to the podcast. Wow.
We are definitely not here to talk about the Nintendo news cycle as much as we could spend forever doing that, because it's an incredibly interesting topic to speculate on. What we are here to do is to talk about another section of The Legend of Zelda, the original, the final section of this game with the brothers Ben and Pat. We're going to tackle Ganon together, and it's going to be a great time. Before we get into that, I'm going to get some housekeeping out of the way so that we can just dive right into it. If you didn't know, Sacred Realms is a weekly re-examination of The Legend of Zelda, one little slice at a time. Sacred Realms drops every Wednesday and is available on all major podcast networks. Every week we play a new section of a Zelda game, and then we sit down here to talk and to drop our hot takes. If that sounds fun to you, please head over to Apple Podcasts, hit that subscribe button, and be sure to leave us a review. 5-star reviews are very greatly appreciated, and they have a chance to get a shout out here on the show. If you want more Sacred Realms in your life, you can head over to patreon.com/Sacred Realms Pod to get access to our Discord channel, listener mail, vote on what game we play next, and so much more. Of course, one of the benefits that we offer to any patron who is in the Master Sword tier or above is that we read their names every week here on the show. Those legendary individuals are Brian, George, Mike, Dylan, Allie, Lennon, Kolku, Rowan, Josh, Nick, Keep It Going Pod, Dante, Gep, Mary, Brittany, Davey, Derek, Albert, Mark, Andy, Cameron, Tyler, Ben, Daniel, Nick D_TV, Travis, Christian, Jonathan, Hyrule Interviews, aka the one and only Maximum Nichols, Garrett, and Drew. We could not make this podcast without your generous support. We appreciate you all so much. You are the most legendary of individuals. But without further ado, let's get into the Sacred Realms Rundown. That is, of course, a 6-part analysis that we get into every week where we talk about what we played and the feelings that it made us feel. Today, we're covering The Legend of Zelda Chapter 5, 2 more dungeons, the end of the game. We've made it to the end of this bite-sized Zelda experience, and we're going to talk about it. Part 1 is, as always, the plot recap. It's usually read by Matt. Matt's not here. I didn't write it. I now have a quandary, and I'm hoping that you two can kind of help me parse this here. So, should I wait and get Matt to write it and record it and insert it later? Or should I just try to completely off the cuff this plot recap?
Well, you two were flip-flopping at the start of the season, weren't you? You were taking turns writing it, so it's not like it's totally off the wall that you would do it.
No, but it is totally off the wall that I would just completely ad-lib it.
What's your confidence level of your ability to ad-lib this right now?
Oh, geez. I mean, there's actually not even, there's really just not a ton of stuff.
2 paragraphs worth of material?
Well, how about this? I think that, Ben, you're very familiar with this game. I think that maybe you could like help from afar. I could also look up a plot.
So I've got Phil's hand-drawn game guide pulled up, and so I've got the maps. I know where we went. I know what we got, and I know what happened. It's just is the craft of the thing there.
Take 95 seconds, wing it, and if it doesn't go well, make Matt record it.
Great idea.
That sounds, man, you're a genius. Okay, we're going to take a moment of silence while I gather my performative skills and energy, and then I'm just going to see where this lands. Because, Matt did this a few episodes back, and it actually turned out pretty great. And that was for Breath of the Wild, so I guess I have to do okay. Okay. All right, moment of silence starts now. Okay, I think I can do this. I think I'm ready. Without further ado, this will be the plot recap as read off the cuff by me. Having conquered our 7th dungeon, Demon, and possessing a great trove of treasures and most of the completed Triforce of Wisdom, the time has come to find our final dungeon. Of course, we have no exact idea of where to look. What we do have is a nifty red candle that we've received in the previous dungeon. What more are we to do with such a great boon than to set everything on fire that we can see in front of us? Link, being the pyromaniac that he is, sets across the countryside and casts fireballs in every conceivable direction. While doing so, takes the opportunity to refill on arrows, bombs, rupees, any supplies that we may have missed, and of course, stocks back up on potion, as one thing is for sure, the difficulty and lethality of the next dungeon that we find ourselves in will be immense, and we need a resource by which to heal ourselves. Eventually, our pyromaniac reign of terror brings us to a lone bush, which, when burned, reveals a secret staircase underground. This is highly advantageous, and the odds of this happening have to be astronomical. Regardless, we head down the staircase and find ourselves in the 8th dungeon. We, upon finding the map later in the dungeon, realize that this dungeon is arranged in the shape of a giant lion's head. It is not as meandering as some of the past dungeons that we've been in, having more direct routes from spot to spot. However, what it does have is a gauntlet of incredibly challenging enemies. In addition to more manhandle of fights and an increase in the amounts of blue wizrobes and dark nuts, we fight more gomas, we unlock more key doors, and most importantly, come across an old man who gives us this cryptic hint. Spectacle Rock is an entrance to death. This hint gives us nothing to go on for the moment in terms of how to overcome this dungeon. What we are able to find, however, are 2 treasures instead of the one that we're normally accustomed to collecting. In addition to a magic book, which teaches us a spell to increase the power of our magic rod, we find a magic key, which, to our surprise, is able to unlock any door and never runs out, thus eliminating our need to continue grinding for dungeon keys. With all of these treasures collected, we head to the final room of the dungeon and discover a Gleeok dragon. This one, however, is different than past iterations that we have discovered in that it has 4 heads and has extra ferocity to match. After fierce combat and many detaching heads, flying fireballs, and fear for our life, we conquer this beast and are able to proceed into the next chamber to claim the final piece of the Triforce. With the Triforce of Wisdom successfully reassembled, the time has come to face Ganon and save Zelda. Where to look, however, we have no clues off the top of our head that could tell us where Ganon's hideout might be until we start thinking about the cryptic hint from the old man in Dungeon 8, who told us, again, that Spectacle Rock is an entrance to death. Keeping this in mind, and knowing that there's only one area of the map that we have yet to traverse, Link heads to the far northwest mountain range, and there discovers 2 rocks which appear to be arranged as a set of eyes. Using our time-honored tradition of locating secrets by blowing entrances in bare rock faces with bombs, we place bombs at the base of both rocks, and one indeed reveals a secret entrance, which, when we enter it, brings us into our final dungeon gauntlet experience, Death Mountain. This dungeon is immense and meandering, with many ladders leading from one area of the dungeon to another. It would be so easy for a person to get lost and to never find their way out. And in addition to this complex layout, there are an even greater concentration of difficult enemies than we've ever met before. In addition to blue dark nuts, blue wizrobes, and many of the other enemies that we faced on our journey, we are faced by 2 completely new foes in the Patron, which is a winged demon surrounded by smaller versions of itself that must be defeated before the main enemy can be overcome, and then the Lanmola, which are quickly moving paired centipedes, which deal incredible damage when they make direct contact with our body. Overcoming all of these obstacles, we proceed through this dungeon. For a moment, it seems that we may become lost in here and never be able to escape, but then a glimmer of hope emerges when we start to discover items that make our experience in this cavern easier. The first is the red ring, which, much like the blue ring that we first discovered, increases our defense, again by double. Link, being truly tanky, is now able to continue exploring the dungeon without quite as much fear to his life as he previously had. Another treasure that we find are arrows that fit our bow perfectly but are tipped in silver as opposed to the normal arrows that we've had this entire time. What these are for, we can't exactly tell, but we definitely take them and are glad to have access to the extra firepower. Of course, we are here for only one goal, and that is to find Ganon and to rescue Zelda. And after much trial and tribulation, we come to a door that brings us into the very chamber of the evil king. The tiles of the floor in this room are arranged in the form of a skull. And of course, the enemy that we fight here is as dangerous as that terrifying iconography promises. Ganon, being an evil sorcerer, is able to call upon the powers of invisibility and to fire fireballs at us from every area of the room in which he can teleport to. The only thing that we are able to do is to swing our sword wildly and hope that we might be able to connect with this evil foe. While dodging fireballs and trying desperately to hit Ganon even though we can't see him, we are able to land a few lucky blows. After the 4th one, we notice that Ganon seems to be briefly vulnerable and needs time to recuperate from our fierce onslaught of blows. Unfortunately, he recovers very quickly, but knowing now the way in which we might be able to overcome this most difficult enemy, we proceed to land 4 more sword blows on the evil king, and during his moment of vulnerability, remember the silver arrows that we found earlier in the dungeon. We knock one into our bow, we pull the string, and we let the arrow fly. It finds its home in Ganon's chest, and he is immediately vanquished. With this evil king disposed of and the Triforce of Power fallen in his remains, we proceed into the next chamber and reunite with Princess Zelda. Freed from her captivity, she thanks us for freeing the land of Hyrule from the evil clutches of Ganon and states her gratitude that the Triforce is now safe and free from his evil clutches. It's been a long time since we started our journey learning about the threat of Ganon from Impa, and since we picked up our wooden sword in the first glade in the south of Hyrule. We've come a long way, we've fought many enemies, and we have grown very strong in that time. Now that we have overcome so much, we are able to proudly exit the dungeon side by side with Zelda, safe in the knowledge that the Triforce will not be claimed by the evil king today. This has been the plot recap, clumsily read by me, but I'm going to edit a lot of that, so it's okay. You won't even know. But I'm going to leave this disclaimer in so that there is some record of the fact that, I've just kind of fumbled through that a bit.
That's a humble brag is what that actually is, because you just nailed that off the top.
Yeah, that was
pretty. Thank you. I appreciate the edification there. I mean, I'm happy enough with it. I think we'll leave it.
Definitely. Good work.
All right. Well, this brings us to part 2, which is our takes in which we talk about this section of the game and how it made us feel. Y'all, you are the guests on our show tonight, so I'm going to send it over to you first. Before I do that, I feel like I really need a quick rundown from you guys on your crazy day of refresher that you kind of put yourself through in order to do this show, which nobody asked you to do, but you just kind of went and did completely on your own for fun. So run us through that real quick.
So I'll go first because Ben's is much more impressive. I started playing the game today, realized I wasn't going to be able to, I'm not my brother. I realized I wasn't going to be able to get through it. So I had some fun with it just to get the feel back. And then I watched a couple Let's Plays of each dungeon to see a couple people do it a couple different ways. Now, I did take on the end of this game, parts of it in our recording. So I also pulled up some of that audio, and I also have done this before. So, I did an okay job. I would say I get a B- if I'm giving myself a grade. But my brother Ben went all out. Hit him with it, Ben.
Yeah, so it was just one of those times where I was taking the subway. So I live, outside. Yeah, I live right near Washington, D.C. And so I had to take the subway out into Northern Virginia. And so I had a 40-minute ride out there, and then I had a 40-minute ride back.
Perfect.
And it was like, I can sit there and just play the Switch. And so I made sure to, log into the NES Switch Online thing while I still had internet, and booted up the game and decided, hey, let's make this challenging. And so my original goal was to do a no heart container, no upgrades at all, in terms of the sword upgrades or the armor upgrades. Well, when you beat Aquamanius in the first dungeon, you have to pick the heart up. The heart container is in your way to get to the Triforce. So without doing screen wrapping, which I don't think you can do in a dungeon anyway, I couldn't get around getting that heart. So then I had one heart. I was like, okay, that's the way it goes. And then I got all the way to dungeon 6, which in my mind is the most difficult dungeon by far in the game. And I could not beat it. I probably died, including kind of rewinds. I probably died 12 times. And so just because I only had 4 hearts, and the rays that get shot at you, I think they do 3 hearts worth of damage if you don't have any armor upgrades. So you can take 1.5 hits essentially and you're dead. And so that's when I was like, all right, well, I'm going to go get the white sword. But to get the white sword, you have to have a total of 5 heart containers. I only had 4 heart containers. So I went and grabbed one more. So then I beat the game from there. So I beat the game with just the white sword and 5 heart containers. I probably took like 2 hours and 15 minutes, and I officially died 5 times, like properly died. And so essentially what I would do is if I would rewind or use a save state only to not have to walk back as far. So, if you die in lots of places, you kind of end up having to walk through a bunch of stuff that was just kind of annoying. And so I would use it to skip that stuff. But outside of that, like if I properly died against a boss, like I'd be like, all right, like I'd start back at the beginning of the dungeon and walk all the way back through to go beat the boss. So, or if I died like in a room in a dungeon, I would start over back at the start of the dungeon and go through it. So yeah, that was it. It was really fun.
Yeah, gotcha.
Very fun.
Wow.
Cool. I mean, yeah, that sounds like torture to me.
I know,
honestly.
right?
But like, it sounds horrible. But also, in fairness, I mean, you've at least played this game one more time than I have. But how many times have you played The Legend of Zelda?
I mean, just this in the past 12 months, I would have played it the time for our podcast. We did a speed run bonus Patreon episode where our mom was the second commentator along with Patrick, and
it's like our best episode, and it's behind a paywall.
Yeah, we really need to release that to the public. And then this time, so that's just 3 in 12 months. But I'll play this game. I mean, I can probably get through it, in about the speed run took me like 57 minutes, I think. So I can play through it pretty quickly, and I love playing it. It might be my favorite Legend of Zelda game.
Yeah, you can just bang it out. I mean, I really like that, and I play a lot of Mega Man. I like to die and get it right the next time and stuff. Like, so I understand how that can be fun. That game is just still very difficult for me, especially as you get into the later levels that are just, again, very challenging. And enemy gauntlet, rooms with just 6 dark nuts. Like, come on, are you kidding me? I walk into every room like, oh my gosh, it takes my utmost concentration.
Yeah, I did do the bomb upgrades. And I always had a red potion with me. So I was drinking potions all the time.
And what, you get the bomb upgrade for 100 rupees in Dungeon 7, is that right?
5 and 7, yeah.
5 and 7. Yeah. Yep. I got to say I love how green level Dungeon 7 is.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And I'm kind of, meh about the matching gray in 8 and 9. Maybe they're slightly different colors, but
yeah. I mean, the limited color palette is definitely fully on display here, and I definitely agree with you on that. I mean, yeah. So I think I definitely can see where I might get to the point with this game where I feel somewhat comfortable with it like that, in that way. I've said on the show several times this season that what I'm really excited to be doing here is to be forming like a foundation of knowledge with this game so that I can, like, without a safety net, later on just have fun and without the pressure of having to create content off of it.
Right. So, yeah, I feel that. I've been kind of doing the same thing. I picked it up and was like, oh, I kind of know where to go. And I know how to follow a guide at the very least and just like have fun and work my way through this game. Because before the Hyrule Podcasters, I'd only really beaten it once, and that was after graduating college, and I just had a week at my aunt's and played it on her Switch. And I don't really remember beating it. I was just like drinking Budweiser by myself, playing Zelda. It was a blast, but I don't know how much I really retained. I will say, I just love this game so much. I love that you just have to go light everything on fire to find, like, you didn't realize that the rocks look like spectacles. So what are you going to do? Right. Let's say you don't have Nintendo power, so you can't call the hotline, right? It's the late 80s, early 90s, and you're trying to play this game. Maybe you get the reference, or maybe you just burn the forest down. Makes me wonder if Alfred in Christopher Nolan's Batman franchise had been hunting Ganon, because he said, how do you catch the thief? You burn the forest down. And that's how you catch Ganon the thief. I mean, he's not exactly the thief in this game.
But what is nice, like in the manual, like the manual that came with it, there's actually this section at the very end on page 47 where it says Impa recounts Zelda's parting words. And it says Princess Zelda had anticipated the difficulty of finding the entrances to levels 7, 8, and 9. And so there are actually clues here that tell you how to find them. And how to find like the 7th, 8th, and 9th dungeons. But, you know, it was just such a different time 35 years ago where the expectation of how long you're going to take to play this game, to get through it, like, of course you're going to burn every bush because, you know, if you find one staircase behind a bush randomly from burning it, that's going to make you want to burn every single bush. Cause like, you're just like, oh my God, what else might be out there? And that's exploration in 35 years ago was so different, and that's what's really exciting.
Yeah, totally. And not only exploration of the map in the game, but of your own mind. Like it really forces you to use your imagination because of the limited technology,
right?
And their just limited understanding of how to build a game this complex. And so it just turns on a part of your mind that maybe a modern game doesn't. But these modern games do in other ways because they have room for all the graphics and all the information, and they can be more intentional with their puzzles because they know how to read their audience with decades of experience.
And I think that's, I mean, Matt and I have come back to that constantly this season. It's been a constant balance of like, we see the beginnings of the Zelda formula here, but like, how were we supposed to know the solution to this puzzle? Or how were we supposed to know the solution to this puzzle or whatever, you know? And sometimes the solutions actually, like there were hints, as obscure as they might be sometimes, and as much as like translation might occasionally botch them. You know, there are hints for some of these things that we just completely missed. But then other times there are things where it's just like, yeah, there truly is nothing. You just kind of have to stumble across this. Right. And then, you know, of course, one thing that we weren't doing that we maybe should have done a bit more of is keep the original game manual handy for reference throughout this thing, which is something that we would just never think to do.
Was that Bill who put us onto that, Ben?
Yeah. That's like the AOLP community is all about like read the manual for older games.
Always, it's part of the game. It's a companion, you know. It's your bottom screen in your DS or whatever.
Yeah, essentially.
Your start menu.
Yeah. Yep. And so, and you know, we definitely could have probably done just a little bit more of that. I still think that we got a pretty great experience overall with this game. And definitely as frustrating as it was for us at times, I think we both came away from it feeling very positive. Of course, we've got, so the two dungeons that we're talking about this week have got two of the most like just indecipherable puzzles that to try and like gain entry to them. I mean, the one to get into Dungeon 8, where it literally is just like, hope you burn the right bush, you know?
Yeah.
So there is an old man near the sea who tells you which tree to burn to get into that dungeon. But of course you would have had to have found that old man. But and this is where, again, like the manual, it tells you like, hey, you're going to have to burn a tree to find the hidden entrance. And there's an old man who will tell you where it is. Go find the old man near the sea. But again, like that's where it's like, you know, trying to play it in a modern lens can be very difficult if you're not ready to constantly refer to the manual, because I mean manuals nowadays are like a front and a back, and it just has some ratings and like, hey, there might be some seizure inducing flashing screens and like
totally they're much less informative. They're not a part of the game. It is silly that Switch, and I will only say this once today, but it's silly that Switch didn't just upload these manuals to these old games.
Yeah, that was very silly.
Well, and also incredibly silly that there's no easy way outside of dying to save your game in here. Like
I didn't even think of that. because
there was a whole thing. Like I was trying to figure out how, like I know I can use save states, but like I want to do this the original way. So what combination of buttons do I have to push? And I Googled this for like 30 minutes, and the only thing I could come up with was like, you have to push this specific combination of buttons on your second NES controller. Right. I'm like, I'm not doing that. Like,
right. I wonder how that works.
So save states it was.
I wonder how that works with like the second Joy-Con. I wonder if it would pull up the save screen. That'd be interesting.
That's a good question.
Speaking of second controllers, I read this on Zelda fandom about the Pole's voice, because I was like, where did that name come from? So, a ghost with big ears and a weak point. he hates loud noise. The game's manual, and stop me if you've already said this season.
Oh yeah. They talked about this on that.
Oh, did you?
Yeah.
That you could talk.
Yeah, we had a whole thing about this.
Okay. My bad. I just learned this today, and that's just outrageous. I want a microphone on my second controller.
I know, that'd be so cool, wouldn't it?
Come on, where's my microphone?
Right. Anywho, yeah, I mean, it's such a weird thing that I wish that one like more toyetic element of the Famicom in
Right.
Japan would have maybe made it over here. But
I mean, it
anyway,
did eventually
shoulda, coulda,
on the GameCube, right? We got a microphone for Mario Party and some other games on GameCube. It just was like 3 systems later or whatever.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. So yeah, I mean, this is so interesting to me, this whole section of the game, because it's usually much easier to talk about and break down the last dungeon and then the Ganon's Tower or whatever it is within that lens of like, man, these have got to be the pinnacle of like difficulty in this game as we kind of lead into the end game. And then we have this huge, big, like, this monumental cinematic moment where we kind of like we storm Ganon's castle and then we fight Ganon and then we have this whole thing where we saved the world and we get all the fun cutscenes, right? And it's so funny because we definitely do get an increase in difficulty with Dungeon 8 and Dungeon 9, but I feel like this game ends kind of unceremoniously, right? I mean, it is very abrupt. Like you make it to Ganon's chamber and you defeat him after an admittedly very difficult dungeon.
Sure,
but then hey, Ganon's dead. His like entrails are in a pile on the floor.
Just
I think
a little pile.
I
think Ben said, "quote a little pile of poop on the floor." I think that's how our mid-season point ends on our first season. Hey, Lyndon, did you have trouble beating Ganon?
Not really.
How was it?
It was fine. His attacks were actually very easy for me to dodge. I mean, obviously it took a little bit longer than I would have liked just because it's truly random whether you're hitting him or not. But I don't know. I mean, I feel like this is probably the easiest version of Ganon that I've ever fought and beat.
What do you think about that, Ben?
Yeah, I mean, I think by the time, if you do all the upgrades, right? If you have the red ring and you have the magic sword, it's going to be very difficult for you to lose against Ganon at this point. And I don't think that is problematic as a storytelling device. I think, you've done the hero's journey, you've collected all the things, you have been leveled up appropriately. And so I think it makes sense that while, there's some trickery, kind of going on with the fight with him being invisible, and then you have to realize that you use the silver arrows against him. I think that beyond that piece of it, I do think that the ease of the fight, is acceptable.
Acceptable. Yeah. I mean, so I'm more into these games for the battling, the combat, and I do love the puzzle solving as well. And collecting is fun, but we're starting to get more into RPG territory with collecting, and that's just it doesn't hold my interest as much. But I do love the way that Zelda games does that. And it seems like you defeat Ganon by collecting all the stuff, not by fighting him in an epic cinematic battle. So that's kind of cool. But I think you're right, Lyndon. The payoff is internal. You're like, I did it. There's not as much like huge flashing, lights and this enormous celebration at the end of the game.
And I think we're one step below. Thank you, Mario. You saved my life and the life of all my friends. Here's a kiss on the cheek and a cake. Right.
Although I do like that there's no kiss on the cheek. We don't need those tropes. But you get the extra quest. Like that's a really cool payoff.
Yeah.
So I do want to talk more about second quest here in just a bit. It's tough to talk about how we feel about this section of the game without talking directly about the dungeons, because as has kind of become the case, the further that we get into this game, the dungeons really are what you're doing, and the time spent in the overworld is pretty minimal, right? Yeah. So I guess where we'll leave part 2 before we move on into the dungeon map is just a quick question to you guys, which is I don't know. I guess the first time, I guess this is tough because y'all played this years and years ago, right?
It's tough.
Okay.
Ask the question.
Yeah, ask
best out of it. Yeah, we're good guests.
Okay, cool. Well, I guess what I'm kind of wondering is, was this a big moment for you? Kind of getting to the end of this game and conquering it for the first time, and maybe not even realizing that it was setting a precedent of like, a foundation for your love of an entire series, but just like, I don't know. I think it's monumental to have beaten this first thing, right? Like
certainly
in its original form.
I mean,
certainly.
Patrick, why don't you go? I mean, I would say our season of the Hyrule Podcasters was really your first time experiencing it fully.
Yeah. Again, like I had played it at my aunt's, but that was a while ago. I was having a lot of fun. I don't even know if I finished the whole thing, but I will say, what is his name? Gliok, the boss in Dungeon 8. That's a tough boss. To me, I mean, clearly more difficult than level 7's dragon. I don't know what that whack enemy's name is.
Yeah, it came back.
But not a difficult one. And to conquer that, to find all the stuff, and then the coolest thing to me was that we got finally some new music. And
it's the best music.
I mean, it's incredible. It really sets the stage for the fact that this is the final moment. And, it's a huge payoff for me to have, for the first time, a brand new song. And it really drove me through the dungeon. It wasn't easy for me to talk to the people, get the hints, find the spot, or cave to using a walkthrough, which I don't like to do when I want to feel like I'm conquering something. Beating Ganon was like, oh, okay, the game's over. Good job, us. It's a little sudden, but I do think that the last 2 dungeons are difficult and hard enough to find in general that I felt a sizable amount of accomplishment after beating it.
Yeah, and I'm in the same boat. I mean, that's why the last 2 times I've played it, I've done it in different ways. Once as a speed run, and then this last time with, handicapping myself substantially. And I felt very accomplished getting through it in, both of those new novel ways. And I think that is that's one of the things that's really exciting about a game like this, is that you can approach it from multiple ways. And I think that's what it probably shares the most with Breath of the Wild is, you have a lot of variability with how you want to choose to beat the game. And I think that makes it very exciting and easily replayable without getting to the second quest even.
Speaking of which, off to the side, can you get into Dungeon 8 early and get that key, or is that level 7 that you get the key?
Yeah, so you get the magical key in 8, and I mean, you need 3 keys to get to it, and you have to be able to beat some pretty tough rooms with a lot of blue dark nuts. But yeah, you can absolutely get it.
That's very cool. Then you don't have.
So I want to table that for 1 second. I do want to table that for 1 second because that's a good bit of trivia as we get into our conversation about the dungeons more specifically. I will just say, in general, where I landed with this ending section of the game was that I think it felt like there was a very, I think there was a very steep climb in difficulty from dungeons like 4 to 5, right?
Yeah.
And then from 5 until here, there was like a much more gradual, like it felt like each one was more difficult than the one before it, but not nearly as steep of a climb as that original from 4 to 5. And I think that is true here as well. I felt legitimately challenged by it. It was very difficult. I think that I am missing a little bit of the pomp and circumstance from the end of this game is what I would like to have had, especially as A Link to the Past even gives you a little bit more than this. And that's an unfair judgment to level against this game because it is so prototypical. It's the first of its kind. Yeah. And I definitely don't knock the game for not having it. I will just say that my own emotional investment in the ending of it is not quite as substantial just because it doesn't have that. But like I said, that's a very unfair thing to kind of put on it. But
I don't know. I think that your emotions are valid. I think that they learned from this game. Give these people a huge payoff. They just worked their butts off to get to this final boss. Give them a good fight and give them a glorious, exciting ending. I think that it's valid. And I don't really remember the end of the second Zelda, but it didn't seem like super exciting either. They figured it out by A Link to the Past. And, that's probably why people are like, give me more. I want a congratulation, which is fair.
Definitely. I think overall, my big sense of pride coming out of this section of the game was that for the longest time, I and Matt and I both had really put off playing this one. Me and my personal life as a Zelda player, because I didn't feel like it had anything extra to bring to the table, especially versus all the more modern ones that I had played. Link to the Past onward, and Matt, because of he enjoys the top-down style of Zelda just a bit less than I do. But I think for the purposes of the podcast, we were both very apprehensive because we felt like this was going to be all difficulty, no substance, just something that we had to get through because that was the premise of the show, was to play them all. And what I came away with was definitely a big sense of pride in having gotten to the end of this game and beaten it and discovered that I found a lot more in it than I had assumed I was going to.
Good. That makes me happy. Yeah, I know that we slightly discussed your apprehensions around playing this game, but you were optimistic, just not excited, I think is fair to say. And I'm glad that you've experienced it and that you're cutting them some slack for not giving you fireworks at the end, and that you enjoyed playing it. I'm glad.
I am intrigued and excited to at some point in the future pick up and at least play the second quest. Too. So I guess that's the biggest kind of compliment that I can give this whole thing is I'm done with it now and I'm looking forward to messing around with it more in the future.
Yeah,
so,
that's a good compliment.
Yep. All right. Well, let's go ahead and get into part 3, which is the dungeon map, where we talk about this week's dungeons from mechanics to music and more. Talk about how he felt about them. Of course, the 2 dungeons we're talking about this week are Dungeon 8, which is Lion, and Dungeon 9, which is Death Mountain. So let's go ahead and pick up the discussion on Dungeon 8, kind of where you were going with it, which is that we've got 2 items here. We've got the magic book, arguably not exciting at all.
Wasn't it like and originally a Bible didn't have like a cross on it or something, and then they took it out? I know that they removed a lot of Christian insignia and symbology from these games when they brought it to America.
Well, and then you would think they would have learned their lesson from that, but then they went and released Ocarina of Time with like a whole ton of Islamic symbology.
Yeah,
so
definitely. Whoops.
Ruh-roh. Yeah.
It's what are you gonna do? There's only so many stories to tell and so many symbols you can draw.
Sure. Yeah. So I think what I want to touch on real quick is the interesting ways in which people kind of choose to maybe not speed run this game, because speed running implies like glitching and non-gameplay ways.
I think that. Can I touch on that? I feel like there are different ways to speed run, and one is 0 glitches. What do you think, Ben? Do you think speed running implies using glitches and shortcuts?
I think that's what most people. I think that's what most people probably think. I think that's why there's so many different categories of speed running. Where there's 100%, there's 100% no glitch. You know what I mean? And even in no glitch, there's usually like a few things you can do, like screen wrapping and things like that. Like, is that a glitch? Is it not a glitch? Like.
I guess so. So if you're saying 100%, the assumption is that they're using at least a maybe glitch.
Yeah, I mean, that's why they all have pretty called out categories. If you look at like speedrunners.net or whatever it is.
Cool. Thank you.
To me, there's a category right under that, though, of like, if the game has no barriers between you and the later dungeons, as this game does. I mean, y'all were saying before, it is obviously the second you get the blue candle, it is possible to get into this dungeon. And as long as you have found 3 keys, then you're able to get the magic key, assuming that you're able to defeat the enemies that stand between you and it. Yeah. And if you get that magic key, then you all of a sudden are in this position where you never have to worry about a key again in the entire game.
Did you find yourself worrying about keys a lot?
No, never.
Okay, yeah.
No, not a single time. And I never bought one either.
Okay, yeah. That's pretty okay, that's what I figured.
Yeah, I just kind of explore and play every level of a dungeon. I'm not trying to like skip through it. But, in my mind, I like doing things out of order. It's something that I love about early games. It's something that I love about Super Metroid. And it would probably just be really fun for me to go get this key early and see how it changes the way that I play the game.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the kind of thing that I'm looking forward to maybe in my next playthrough of this game is what interesting, like, knowing where everything is and what you get in each dungeon, just trying to maybe go do it out of order just for funsies, you know? And so I do think it's really interesting. I think from that perspective, this is one of the coolest things in the game that you can do is go and get this magic key and then never have to worry about them again. So I don't know. Like, have either of you ever played this game that way, where this is the first thing you went and did?
No.
So I go do it right now. I'm just
kidding. Yeah. The biggest thing I do is like when I did the speed run, I do what's called the Great Gathering, which is essentially you do this like counterclockwise loop on the eastern half of the map, and the idea is like once you do that whole loop and get to level 1, I think you have like 7 heart containers. You'll have 200 plus rupees. You'll have a magic shield, the blue candle. You'll have bombs. You'll have the white sword. And so that's a really easy way to kind of like kickstart a like fast run, is to show up in dungeon 1 and already have like you're pretty tanked out already.
Yeah, definitely. And I know that Matt and I both kind of like stumbled into that version of the game.
Right, yeah.
And so I, maybe one day I'll go back and give that a shot. For Dungeon 8, where are you guys at with this one? Because to me, what was kind of happening here was very difficult from a combat perspective, but not necessarily so much from a layout perspective. I don't think that this one was quite as challenging from like just from being able to find your way around it as some of the past ones have been.
Sure, I feel that. I think that the layout's a little more straightforward. They just like throw so many enemies at you. And that's like this is just a brutal dungeon in that way. And maybe they decided to kind of make it a little easier layout, because I didn't even really get lost, and I always get lost.
Yeah, you dead end pretty quickly. So it looks like you can't go any more than like 2 rooms before you hit a dead end if it's not on the main path, until you get to the, are you going to get like, are you going to go up and get the magic key, which is technically like an optional item?
Sure.
So yeah. And then as far as the combat goes, and this is one of those things where like knowing this changes everything, I feel like. So the dark nuts, Lyndon, I remember when I was listening earlier this season and you and Matt were kind of talking about like their erratic movement behavior. And most of that comes down to how they're programmed to move. And so, and if you already know this, you can stop me, but essentially when Link is in a room, there is a Link and there is an anti-Link that you can't see. An anti-Link is in a mirrored position no matter where you are in the room. And what happens is every time the dark nuts move, they either move towards anti-Link or towards you, which is why their walking behavior is just so erratic compared to everything else, because they're the only enemy that is attracted to both anti-Link and Link. And so what
isn't that crazy?
Yeah. And what you can do to make your life a lot easier, because they kind of do those like sharp pivots and turns, and this also works for Wizrobes, is that you never want to be on a tile. You always want to be on the intersections of tiles. because that's how you can kind of put yourself in the best position when you're fighting Wizrobes and Darknuts. So that way you can hit them, but they can't hurt you.
Be in the intersection of the tile. Explain that to me.
Intersection, like where two tiles, you can either be on a tile or you can be on the intersection of two tiles, and you always want to be on the intersection of tiles. You don't want to be on tiles,
because then anti-Link is also on an intersection.
Yeah, and it's just the way that the Darknuts move. They can only move on tiles. They can't move on intersections of tiles. So you're a half step away from them, which means you only have to move a half step away to avoid them versus a full step away to avoid them.
Gotcha. All right. So they're attracted to anti-Link, and if you stand on the intersection of tiles, then you can get away from them easier. You can get to them easier.
Right. You can hit them, but they can't hit you. They can still turn into you, but just it's
sure.
Yeah.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, it's very fascinating.
Yeah, that's crazy. And like, it's definitely good to know that. It's the sort of thing that, like, Matt and I didn't do too much mechanical digging into mechanical trivia into this game before we played it. And of course, in the intervening 35 years since it's come out, a lot of people have figured out interesting things like this. And so, that's what I'm talking about, where I'm like, I'm continuing to accumulate that bank of knowledge, right? Totally. For future playthroughs. So that's all good to know. Yeah, I think definitely, the combat was definitely the biggest part of this dungeon for me. Right. Lots of blue Darknuts.
Lots of mini bosses.
I think that. Yeah, Manhandla, even though they are typically pretty easy, they can be a drain on hearts, especially if you don't land that perfect bomb, right?
Definitely.
But it's really mostly the Darknuts.
I
still think that's the most difficult enemy in the entire game.
Question for you:
the Blue Wizrobes are a close runner-up. But
question for you on the Darknuts: Did you use a lot of bombs when you were in those rooms, or did you just try and use the sword to kill them?
Just the sword, and I probably could have been a bit more free with my bombs, but what I was really trying to do in the dungeons was hang on to them so that I could like blow walls open, because that's a thing that you're just doing constantly.
Yeah, definitely. And getting that bomb upgrade again, it just makes the dungeon easier to navigate, because you can kind of spare bombs once you have those upgrades,
Yeah. And in hindsight, I probably shouldn't have been quite so conservative with my bombs, just because I was kind of existing in this world where Matt and I had this rule where it's like, all right, look, if we run out of bombs, then we'll hit the rewind and we'll go back. Because a lot of it is like trial and error of like, is there a bomb wall here? Is there not a bomb wall here? And you can pretty quickly blow through most of them doing that.
And then you just have to leave and go get bombs. And, that's just a waste of time when you're an adult with a lot of other stuff to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, absolutely. It's like, I'm definitely willing to extend my time playing this game if I feel like I deserve it. But like bomb RNG is one of those things where I'm not willing to lose an hour to it. So, that's kind of where I was at with that. But what I really want to get onto is our discussion about Dungeon 9 Death Mountain, because this one is really, I mean, of course, I know we usually mention the boss before we move on from a dungeon. Sure. I guess I'll do that real quick. It's another freaking Gleeok. Yeah. I mean, like what? Yeah. I mean, what else is there to say? It's got an extra head.
It does have an extra head. I mean, it got me. I didn't get through this boss as smoothly as I'd wanted to, but still, it's boring. It's nothing new. We've been here before.
Yeah. So let's go ahead and move on to Dungeon 9. Unless anyone has anything to say about the magic book that ostensibly upgrades the offensive capability of your magic wand, but like, do you still ever use it? Probably not.
Very helpful if you only have 5 hearts, I will say. Very helpful.
Really?
Sure, because it's a long range weapon, which means you can just not be near things and hit them.
But how many things does it do damage to? I was finding that a lot of stuff was immune to it.
Likes in particular.
Yeah,
gotcha.
Yeah, it's good against the likes.
Yes, which is very nice.
And I guess there is something nice about having an offensive weapon that you can use to attack things, but also illuminates rooms. You don't have to get the candle out and then swap to something else. I can see where that would be handy.
That weapon's so offensive that it's canceled.
and it also very importantly doesn't use rupees. And when you're buying red potions every half dungeon, it racks up very quickly.
And that is fair too, but
which again, these are all choices,
right? Exactly.
Today.
Sure, yeah, sure. Sad to say that cancel culture came for the improved Magic Wand. Yeah.
R.I.P. Magic Wand.
Yeah. But anyway, okay, so we get into Death Mountain. Of course, let's talk about the treasures that we get here. One is the Red Ring, which a base increase to your defense is never off the table for me. Like that's one of the most useful items that you can get in any Zelda game. But then there's the silver arrows, which of course we all know are instrumental to defeating Ganon. But do they do a base increase in damage to regular enemies?
I didn't use them in any capacity that would have garnered that information for me, I don't think. Because I just use them because I usually get them and then like I'm at Ganon within 3 minutes. So
right.
Yeah, you just kind of use them immediately on Ganon. That's a good question. I don't think I can Google that fast enough.
Even Phil's guide just says silver arrows essential to defeating Ganon.
Yeah.
Like, okay, cool.
Right.
I don't believe that they have any increased attack power versus your normal arrows. So for the most part, let's put the silver arrow aside until we get to Ganon. What we have here is the Red Ring, which basically aids us in our survivability in this dungeon. And that's essential because this dungeon is dense. It's twice the size of any other dungeon in the game.
It's huge.
And it's labyrinthine. I mean, it's very easy to get lost in here.
What does it have, like 50 plus rooms?
It's something like that, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the grid I'm looking at has A through H, and then it's got columns A through H and then rows 1 through 8. So yeah, it's pretty substantial. I don't know. Tell me, especially, 56. Yeah. Ooh, good immediate math there. So one of you has played this game more recently for the first time all the way through. The other has played it many times. I guess each of you kind of give me your perspective on this dungeon and where you're at with it.
For me, I'll go first because Ben has a lot more expertise. For me, it's a total headache and a maze. I like to just run through dungeons, killing enemies and finding my way through happenstance. And you really have to pay attention to what you're doing and try and use your short-term memory. It's a difficult one. In fact, I would probably I've gotten extremely frustrated, like if I was doing this by myself with no help.
Yeah, I mean, I think this dungeon in particular is the definition of needing to do your own hand-drawn map on definitely. A grid, which is what the manual tells you to do. And what I can tell you, like, our mom and our Aunt Becky would have hand-drawn maps like for this dungeon, and it probably would have taken them, 4 hours to get through every single room and clear everything out and write their notes and everything.
Yep.
And so, I think if you're thinking of the game that way, in that, oh, right, this is like part of the video game experience is drawing your own map and doing that kind of stuff, then I think it achieves its goal. If you're, again, looking at it in a modern lens, I think the fact that there are bombable walls everywhere, that there are staircases that go every which way, that you have to use a secret room with a bomb in it to get to Ganon, I think would be exceptionally painful for most modern gamers if they weren't willing to if they weren't looking at a guide or they weren't making their own map.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's one of the things that I kind of came away now that I'm done with all the dungeons in this game is that I do sort of wish that the dungeon map for each one of these was accessible just a little bit earlier in each one. Especially just because it really doesn't, it's not like it gives you that much information. You just kind of understand the base layout of the dungeon. Sure. And it's not even necessarily telling you which rooms that you've been in and which ones you haven't been in.
Sure.
So yeah, I mean, I do think that this is definitely one where even if you were to get the dungeon map in the first room, it would still give you quite a lot of challenge.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely wouldn't help me very much. My sense of direction isn't great. And the smaller dungeons in this game are very welcome. I like the smaller dungeons. This one's this one's a pain, which I also appreciate. I'm not hating.
Yeah,
I
you have to
like
go
a good
through.
challenge.
You have to go through 6 underground labyrinths. That doesn't include getting the red ring or the silver arrows to complete the dungeon.
Right.
And that's pretty tough. Like six changes of location like that. We can call them like teleporting for short. Like 6 teleportations is very difficult to keep in your head.
The shape is really cool.
The shape's very cool.
The shape is definitely very cool. It's so funny because I feel like this is, a lot of Zelda games have a lot of moving throughout the dungeon via staircases, right? Link's Awakening, for instance, a lot of dungeons kind of rely on that mechanic.
Dun, dun,
That was good. I love that. But what makes this one so difficult is the fact that it is literally basically just a square. It is it is like an 8x10 square rectangle, I guess, and it's chunky, and there's really no. It's a rat's nest basically of rooms.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I sort of admire it just a little bit from that standpoint.
Yeah, it's really cool. And it looks like a skull, and that's really badass. I can get down with that. I learned that the skull-shaped hideouts in Breath of the Wild are inspired by this level's layout.
Oh, that's neat.
ZeldaFandom.com taught me that.
I kind of wish that when we come back to top-down Zelda games again in the future, whenever Nintendo chooses to make another one, I wish that they would maybe come back around to, not for every dungeon, but just for like 1 or 2. It's just like super dense. The map layout of the dungeon doesn't really help you all that much. Very complicated like this, because I think with some of the more modern trappings of top-down Zelda, like some of the things you've got to work with in like A Link Between Worlds and stuff like that, I think it would be a little bit less of a pain in the ass to deal with this.
Yeah.
Especially if you had the ability to like mark on your map, which a lot of newer Zelda games do.
Now that you can have an expansive start screen and you can mark up your map, it would be really fun to navigate a big rat's nest, as you put it, with a bunch of different stairwells and stuff to see where you've gone. It's really tough. Like Ben was saying, getting through the whole thing, making your own map at home, that's going to take a few hours. Like that's a whole evening and some probably. But, 4 hours of fun. Like, you don't get the fireworks at the end, but you get through this thing, which is very impressive to be able to do that.
Certainly.
And I would love
I absolutely agree.
to loop back around to the music, which I brought up a little prematurely. Ben, you said it was your favorite. You like this one the most?
Oh, yeah. Every time I play Smash Bros., I will set this music as the music to play.
Oh, it's done so well in Smash Bros.
It really is.
There's another version of this in Four Swords that's really dope. It's like, it almost sounds offbeat. There's this is constant drum beat, and you expect it to land in a different spot. It's really cool. And then it comes in with these like synthesized vocals, like something out of Metroid. It's a really Metroid sounding reimagining overall. You can find that on YouTube. I highly recommend listening to that.
Yeah, and I definitely want to. If nothing else, I appreciate having an extra soundtrack to like slip into the audio mix on this episode.
Yeah,
right?
Definitely. It's so good. And it's so dark. It takes it even further into the darkness.
Definitely. I'll definitely be looking up some remixes of this one just because you suggested it to me. I appreciate those very much. Yeah. So we've talked about this dungeon. Obviously, it's confusing, tons of enemies, a few new ones. I feel like the new ones, even though they're interesting and they kind of vary up the encounters a little bit, they're still not any harder than Blue Wizrobes, Blue Dark Nuts. What we do have a lot of in this dungeon is rooms where you've got Blue Wizrobes, Blue Dark Nuts, and tons of bubbles just floating around.
Ben hates the bubbles. God. That's Ben's least favorite enemy, I think.
Oh, they're the worst. They're the worst.
That's where the wand comes in handy, is with the bubbles.
Does it hurt them?
No. I just mean to shoot other things, to have an offensive weapon.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Because you can still use your wand even if the bubbles have kept you from using your sword.
Or your bow and arrow. Yeah, exactly.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes total sense. I just think that, like, I don't know. I don't have a problem with the fact that being hit by a bubble can incapacitate you temporarily. I think that if that was all they did, then it would be fine. But I hate, and I'm so glad that bubbles in later Zelda games don't do this. I hate that they just free roam this area.
Yeah.
Because in like starting in at least like Link to the Past, I think what really happens is they kind of what they'll do is they'll hug borders of like rooms or blocks.
Totally. Way more of that going on in the later games.
Yeah. And I think in this game, kind of what happens is you've got 3 bubbles in a room and they could be anywhere. And you've got 4 blue whiz robes and they could be anywhere. And then you've got like 4 blue dark nuts and they're also moseying around.
I really have to be sharp to be able to, keep 6 dark nuts and a bubble or 2 all in my head. Otherwise, I'm just going in and knowing I'm going to lose a lot of hearts.
What I really want to know about is where you are at specifically with Ganon. I mean, this is the boss of the game, right? And I feel like especially if you know what you're doing, this version of Ganon is kind of a pushover.
Yeah, it's definitely not the challenge that you find in the later games. And as we said before, the dungeon seems to be the final challenge of the game. But I will say it's scary. It's disorienting. And if you haven't gotten the hints on the fact that you need the arrows, then it's possible that you're going to try to hit him with everything that you have and just keep dying over and over again. Again, I try really hard to keep it in the context of this is your first time playing it. It's whatever year the game came out when I record Hyrule Podcasters. And so I try to think of it in that context. When Ganon first shows up, first of all, I love the teal. Is that teal? I'm a little colorblind with my greens and blues. Would you call them teal?
Yep. Nope. It's teal.
I love the teal pig, demon with the red gowns. I think that the red armor. I think that just looks extremely intimidating, super flashy, super tough. And then the fact that he immediately disappears, like, what do you even do with that if you're not prepared to go into that fight, right? And again, this is an early game. I'm sure that there are other invisible enemies in video games before this, but that's still a trick that they can pull out at this point in time that is going to completely disorient the player. And if you miss the hints about the arrows, if you just didn't happen to stumble upon them in the first place, you're going in there and you're getting your butt whooped a few times and then maybe backtracking to figure out if you missed an item or something. I know that I just kind of stumbled into Ganon in Breath of the Wild and was like, whoops, and got my butt kicked. I feel like that probably happened to people in this game as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and so my biggest thing was coming into this fight and seeing the design on the floor, like the shape of a skull, and then like the black areas around it. And of course, like I'm trained by my time with Link's Awakening to feel like I can't walk off into the black.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's so stupid because that's not something that's happened in this game. What has happened is that without the ladder, you can't just like free mosey into areas that look like that, you know? Mm-hmm. But I definitely spent my front half of this fight sticking to the gray tiles because I just like, I don't know. That's like so ingrained in me as a top-down Zelda player.
Makes sense. That definitely makes sense. And maybe it was, maybe it was on purpose. Maybe it's supposed to freak you out. Half of a warrior's armor, that the most outward showing part of the armor is to intimidate. And the setting is also a part of that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think where I'm at with Ganon in this game is that it is a fun boss fight. What I really wish had happened here is that there had been some kind of like phasing system to this fight. Like Ganon has a one phase and then his second phase, and then at the end of phase 2, you can kill him. And again, old ass game is old, and that's fine. I just wish that it had gone on a little bit longer. Where I kind of came down with this fight is that it really falls into the convention of boss fights throughout the rest of this entire game, which is that they just are not hard. Yeah. The dungeons are hard.
Yeah.
The exploration is hard. The puzzle solving can be difficult. The bosses are not hard. Like 100%. You know, every single one I would say failed to challenge me in any meaningful way.
Yeah, I hear that. What do you think about that, Ben?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're playing the game as it's meant to be played, and you're picking up all of the heart containers and the upgrades, I think my biggest caveat there would be Dungeon 6, which is the one that introduces the Wizrobes. And if you don't have 12 heart containers and are able to get the magical sword, the gauntlet to get through that dungeon to the final boss can have you in a pretty weak state. You also might not quite have enough money to have bought the blue ring. And so I think if you haven't upgraded to the magical sword and have the blue ring, I think Dungeon 6 is a very steep and difficult dungeon. And then when you get to the three-headed Gilok at the end, I think that can cause a lot of problems for players because it is a very long haul to get all the way there.
Yeah, but still, that's the dungeon making the boss hard and not the boss being hard.
Yeah. No,
in general. Yeah. But yeah, I appreciate that input. I feel like it just wasn't built with difficult bosses for some reason. They just didn't do it. They could have just added like 5 bubbles to every boss fight and it would have been harder.
or at least more health to each boss. I mean, you know, a lot of these with like sword beams and whatnot were, you know, 2-hit KO'd or whatever. But
that's pretty standard.
It is what it is.
Games, right? I mean, even moving forward, this isn't like Shadow of the Colossus. It's not Dark Souls. Like, you know, for the most part, the dungeon and the puzzling and the difficult, you know, enemy mobs and the boss they're all part of it, right? They're not standalone entities.
I would to say it in a kind way. Clearly, the developers were focusing on the challenges being the dungeons and the exploration and the collecting, and that extremely difficult boss fights was simply not their priority when designing this game.
Yeah, I think that that's very fair to say. And I'm glad that as these games kind of went further into the series, a bit more of a balance was able to be struck there.
Me too.
I think there is something to be said for the fact that if you're going to spend most of your time exploring a dungeon, then that should probably be the most difficult thing that you're doing, because I don't think anyone would say that the combat is the main thing about The Legend of Zelda. So I guess when you look at it that way, it makes a certain amount of sense. But I do think there is a halfway point between this and a Dark Souls kind of experience, and later Zelda games did manage to find it. Do either of you have anything else that you want to say about Death Mountain before we move on to our next area of the podcast?
I'm all good, thanks.
I love the name Death Mountain. That's what I have to say. Thank you for just going all out and naming it Death Mountain, so that when I die a million times trying to get through it, I'm like, well, it's what it's called.
Well, and at least in this game, it lives up to its name, right?
Yes.
I mean, you get your ass pumped.
You definitely do.
A lot here.
It's brutal.
Yeah.
That's it.
Love it. I completely agree with you. So we have got, of course, we've got our next 2 parts, bloopy trails and Z targeting, and those have become shorter and shorter as we've kind of gone further and further into this game. So we're just going to do a lightning round here, where the first thing that comes to the top of your head, you just spit it out and we're going to run with it. Part 4 is, of course, bloopy trails, where we talk about interesting things that diverted our attention. And if there is nothing that comes to mind, that's totally fine. But Ben, I'll send it to you first and then to Pat.
So since I did a full playthrough over this, mine is going to be that you have to pick up the first heart container after beating Aquamanius in Dungeon 1. That is the first thing that has popped into my head.
Gotcha. And I think so interesting, especially now we know that a lot of players take pride in being able to do things like 3 heart runs and whatnot. And I think it's unfortunate when you're not actually able to do that just because of something weird like this, you know?
Interesting game design though, right? Like they wanted you to know you're supposed to pick this thing up, right? So like, because how would you know to pick that thing up? So yeah. Very cool.
Cool.
I think the first thing that pops into my head is burning bushes. you know?
And just how fun it is to take your brand new red candle and just see what all you can light on fire as soon as you leave that last dungeon.
Yeah, it's such a fun mechanic. They spent all this time building this map just to have you blow it up and burn it down.
Yeah.
You know, like what a fun way to interact with your environment. There's not a lot of ways to interact with your environments in these early games. And short of like pulling some vegetables out of the ground in Mario 2 and swinging on vines in Pitfall, this is a huge, this is a really fun thing that they included in this game.
I'm going to come back to that point in just a second. Before we do that, I'm going to get into my bloopy trail, which was all I really did extra to the dungeons in this section of the game was stock up. I stocked up on bombs, on arrows. I went and found another old lady who sold me some potion. That's really it. I 100%ed this game without even meaning to. I had all extra hearts.
Nice.
Like 3 weeks ago, I had all of them. I didn't even realize I had all of them, but then I went and looked and I was like, oh, cool, did that. So neat. So yeah, as far as side quests and, time spent not in dungeons, it was pretty minimal. That does, of course, bring us, though, into Z targeting, which is where we lock onto fascinating characters or enemies that we happen to cross as part 5 of the Sacred Realms rundown. I'm going to go ahead and go first and just give my Z targeting, which is going to be the... I was actually going to say the blue whiz robes, and I'm just now remembering that I already did them in a past episode, so maybe I shouldn't have gone first.
It's almost like they're haunting you.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. Like I see them when I close my eyes at night, right? Yeah. So I guess I'll go ahead and use my Z targeting on Zelda.
Sure. Yeah.
Why not? She's a character in this section of the game.
Certainly.
I just think it's so funny, especially later Zelda games have not featured Zelda nearly as much as I feel like they probably should have or could have, And this one is very much like, especially given that the game is named after her,
Yeah.
I really feel like this character, if you can even call her that, has such little importance and weight to the overall story, of this game. Like, and even when you get to the very end, it's just so perfunctory where she is essentially just an NPC that gratifies you for spending your time having undergone this quest. And yeah, I mean, such a prototypical version of Zelda, especially when you compare her to both Link and Ganon, where this version of Link is pretty much the same as every other version of Link that we have in any Zelda game ever, right? And this version of Ganon, plus or minus some character development, is more or less the same as every other version of Ganon that we ever have ever, Yeah. But this version of Zelda is very much just like, just really wasn't there for any of it.
Sure, I feel you. Again, I'll come back around though. At least you don't kiss her or she doesn't kiss you on the cheek and bake you a pie. Like they let her. They didn't fill her out very much, but at least they didn't make her a damsel in distress in the same way that they made Peach that character.
And that's fair. That's a good point. I will go ahead and send it over to Pat. Who would your Z targeting pick be?
I like the old man that says Spectacle Rock is an entrance to death, because that is just like, this is the most ominous. Like, what are you talking about? And like, do I want to go there? Should I avoid it? Is this where I'm supposed to go or where I'm not supposed to go? And this guy's just chilling between two flames like they all are and just delivers this incredibly cryptic, morbid message. That's my guy right there.
Somebody has to have made a metal song out of just that line,
definitely.
Right?
Definitely. Spectacle Rock is an entrance to
I love it.
Well, if nobody did it, we just did it.
You got the clip. You got the clip to start this episode right there.
There it is. I mean, it's ripe for a remix if nothing else. Like I'll send it off, and there you go. We'll become famous. It'll be great.
We got this.
So then I would go with the new. So we get 2 new enemies, and I really like the Patra enemy in this dungeon.
Yes.
It hits incredibly hard if you get hit by it.
Mm-hmm.
And the one that kind of does the spiral pattern, it looks 3D-ish when it's
It
happening.
does.
It's very
It
interesting
really
that
does.
they managed to do that, with the graphics engine that they had here. And so I'm always very impressed when I see the Patra.
Me
Yeah.
too. It looks so 3D compared to everything else in the game.
Yeah,
I'm always impressed by that. Did you know that you can hit that with the magic wand and harm it?
I did not know that, but I'm glad to know it now.
Not with the projectile, just with the wand itself.
Oh, just like if you were using a sword?
Yep. Exactly.
Oh,
Which
cool.
seems like it doesn't matter. But again, if we're going to play this game a different way, like let's say we only have the wooden sword the whole game or whatever, then knowing that you can hit it with that wand, very important.
Yeah. Well, Phil's hand-drawn game guides at the very end makes note that one of the ways that you can play this game is a swordless run, and that's probably one of the things they use for it.
Yeah, definitely.
Very cool.
Yeah. Which is definitely a good thing to keep track of. I mean, like you said, sounds useless on paper, but if you're intentionally trying to undergo some kind of crazy challenge with this game, then
totally.
Yeah, you take those tips where you can get them, and I do completely agree with you that the pattern of the movement on those enemies is really interesting. It's big shades of like things that would go on and be done more commonly on the SNES,
definitely
in the 16-bit era. So I was impressed by it as well.
I gotta say, like after this whole conversation, I'm so glad that you got to play this game for the first time, Lyndon, and that you're coming away with this different perspective on it, and that you're excited to play the second quest. And Ben, you mentioned earlier that like this, one of the ways that this game is like Breath of the Wild is that you can approach it in so many different ways. And I never thought about it like that. And this just gives me a new way to pitch this game to people that have never played it. Like get through it once, use save states, have fun with it, use a guide, and then you get a second quest and you can go back in and create your own second quest by creating challenges for yourself, because it's really kind of a free-form game compared to a lot of the games of this era. Certainly. And the games for the next 10 years.
Yep. Yeah, even I mean, a lot of games between this one and Breath of the Wild, to your point, you do not have this flexibility with.
Yeah.
And for that reason alone, I feel like it deserves a lot of recognition, and I think has more than earned its place as being a fun challenge in its own right, even past just being recognizable as being the first game in a storied series. Right.
Facts.
So this brings us pretty seamlessly into part 6 of the Sacred Realms rundown, which is our final thoughts, where usually Matthew breaks down this game, this section of the game, in as succinct a way as he can possibly think to do. I will carry that torch for him tonight. I believe this is actually the first time that I've ever done it. That can't be right. I feel like I've recorded without Matt before, but I don't recall having done it before. Anywho, interesting trivia there. If anyone knows the answer, I forgot. I've slept since then. Regardless, yeah, I know, right? I can't keep track of this stuff. Regardless, final thoughts. The ending of The Legend of Zelda brings us a duo of difficult dungeons. There are a lot of interesting challenges to overcome, a lot of very difficult combat, a gauntlet of incredibly tough enemies. What we get are two fun experiences that, even if difficult to find, more than live up to their status as what are supposed to be the two most challenging dungeon experiences in this entire game. While neither, including the final dungeon with the final boss Ganon, might have the most challenging boss fights that we've experienced thus far, the challenge of wayfinding through the dungeon and acquiring the treasure is just as difficult as it ever has been. That brings us to the end of the very first Legend of Zelda game ever created, which truly set the bar for what an exploration-based adventure game could be, and truly was the beginning of an incredible era of game design, and gave us the birth of my personal favorite video game series ever made. And so, if for no other reason than that, we can call this one truly a legendary creation. And I am personally very happy to have had the opportunity to play it, and very glad to have come away from it feeling like I had fun, which was the whole point all along.
Exactly.
Yep. This, of course, brings us to the end of the Sacred Realms Rundown. We will be back in 2 weeks with another installment of the Sacred Realms Rundown. That one will be covering the introduction chapters of Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link. Of course, we're going to have... I know, right?
Wait.
Yeah, dear God help us.
I'm so excited.
Yep. God. Okay. I'm glad somebody is, but maybe I'll find things to love there as well. The same way that I did
There's
here.
a lot of good stuff in that game, and don't tell Ben I said. Ben, cover your ears.
I'm not listening.
There's plenty of fun stuff to find in that game. Just be patient with the fighting. Just be patient with the fighting.
Absolutely, will do.
Rewind.
And of course, y'all will be invited back on to talk about that whole experience with us, having played it somewhat recently yourselves. We're always looking for people who have got more informed perspectives than we do because we're newbies. Next week, we will be back, of course, with our traditional rank and recap episode where the detective will join us again, and we will rank The Legend of Zelda alongside the other episodes that we... Before we get out of here, Ben and Pat, Hyrule Podcasters, where can people follow you?
Ben, you want to take this?
Yeah, no, sorry. You can you can search for us on any podcasting app of your choice at we are Hyrule Podcasters. You can also follow us on Twitter at Hyrule Podcaster and on Instagram at Hyrule Podcasters.
And we also have a Patreon if you want to support us more directly.
And I would definitely encourage you to go over and do that, especially knowing now that Ben and Pat have so many incredible projects coming down the pipe talking about such a wide variety of things. These guys have a ton of chemistry. And I definitely, I may check out Sandman and then hop into your whole series on that and kind of follow it along during my first ever experience with that IP because I've heard so many great things about it.
Sure, it's great. Even if you haven't read the comics, we fill you in. We fill you in. So you don't have to do all the heavy lifting.
Love it. Love it. Well, guys, seriously, as always, I appreciate you coming on so much. This has been a great episode, even with the man down. I think we had a really good time. I'm very excited to have you back on for the Adventure of Link because that is so much more of an unknown quantity.
I'm excited to come on and talk about it. I really am. I'm not just saying that because Ben's in the room.
We've got a lot of people lined up who have actually a lot of love for that game, and I feel like it
deserves some love. I'm gonna keep giving it hate, but it does deserve some love.
Yeah, and I feel like the common knowledge is that game is such a hassle. So I'm very, very glad to be getting some contrarian perspectives to that popular narrative, at least. But all that being said, we will definitely talk soon. Wish you guys all the best and really appreciate you coming on.
Thanks for
y'all are
having
awesome.
us. You're awesome. Give your brother our best. Can't wait to talk to you again.
Absolutely. I think that is gonna about tie us up for the day. Sorry, I was reading a text over here. Somebody texted me something about a Nintendo Direct, and I was just like, "Ooh, did they announce it?" But no, it's just a friend of mine who's like, "Hey, did you hear about this Nintendo Direct?" It's like, "Yes, I heard. I've just been talking about it." You got me all excited for nothing. Okay, I'm gonna carry that energy into the weekend.
I had one more thing if you want to use it. Thanks for having us on the Sacred Realms Podcast.
That's a thing now. We're gonna have to carry that forward. We have no other choice. The rules of content demand it.
I gotta say, you need to make Matt just do a 5-minute rant on how much he hated these last 2 dungeons and stick it on the end of this episode. It would just be priceless.
Definitely.
I can definitely do that, and of course, we'll get a lot of Matt's unfiltered opinions and views in that rank.
Yeah, the rank and recap app is going to be a lot of fun.
I didn't think you were going to do that until the end of the season, so that's cool. You're going to do it.
Yeah, we're gonna rank halfway through and then do it again on the next one. But all right, y'all. Well, let's go ahead and get out of here for the week. If you enjoyed today's show and you'd like a little extra Sacred Realms in your life, you can head over to patreon.com/Sacred Realms Pod and you can become a patron. If you've got no rupees, it is not a problem. 5-star Apple Podcast reviews are a great free way to support us. More reviews means that more people see our show. That makes us very happy Hylians. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Sacred Realms Pod for updates on the podcast and for behind-the-scenes action. Sacred Realms will be back next Wednesday with our ranking and reviewing of The Legend of Zelda. The Legend of Zelda, if you're not caught up, can be played in a variety of places on the Nintendo Entertainment System, on the NES Mini, on a variety of eShops, and of course on the Nintendo Switch Online NES service, which is the way that Matt and I have been playing it. In the meantime, however, may your hearts be full, may your arrows never miss. We'll catch y'all next time. Sacred Realms is an independent podcast production which is produced, edited, and mixed by me, Lyndon Willoughby. Our music comes from Zelda and Chill by Mikkel and is graciously provided to us by Mikkel and Game Chops Records. Zelda and Chill is available to stream on Spotify or to purchase directly from GameChops.com. Finally, our thanks go to Nintendo for creating such exceptional and innovative experiences.